Hey, hi everybody. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Mike Parsons. I'm the marketing director for Universum in Asia Pacific. I hope everyone is doing well today. Thanks for joining us. I think we have a really great session lined up for you today. Across the next 40 minutes, we're going to be taking a deeper look at attracting high achievers and how they differ or not from other talent. The session is going to look at some things such as the career goals that these high achieving graduates are now prioritizing, specific qualities that matter most regarding an employer's reputation, and the channels you should be using when communicating with this group. The person to take you through this short journey is Universum Asia Pacific Senior Vice President and Global Employer Branding Advisor, Rachele Focardi. I've personally worked with Rachele for several years now, and I can tell you that she's deeply passionate about talent attraction and employer branding. For a long time now, she's been advising companies on how to attract, manage, and retain the full generational spectrum of talent, which is a fast-paced area that's been evolving rapidly over the years. Although she's now based in Asia, Rachele has worked and advised companies all over the world, so this session should be really great no matter where you're tuning in from. But before I hand over, I just want to remind you all to use the questions feature. Send in your questions as we go along. At the end, Rachele and I will try and answer as many of them as we can in a given time. And if there's anything we don't have time for, Rachele, myself, or any of your colleagues in your local markets can help. So please reach out. And of course, we will send out a follow-up email to all of you. This will contain the recordings of the session, links to other materials, the slides and everything. So no need to worry about any of those. Okay, so that's all from me now. I'll pass you over to Rachele. Rachele, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. I am very, very excited to be able to share with you some of the findings from our most recent white paper. The competition for talent is continuing to be as strong as ever. And of course, being able to attract talent that exhibits very specific skills of leadership, of ability to culturally integrate, and so on and so forth is becoming more and more important. So hopefully you will be able to have some takeaways to walk away from today's session. So just to give you a slight brief reminder of Universum, as you know, we are the global leaders in employer branding. We've been doing exclusively employer branding for the last 30 years. And our strength is really, and our foundation is really in the research that we conduct on a yearly basis. So every year we survey more than 2 million students and professionals across all the countries that you see here on this slide. And what we do is we ask them questions about their career preferences and expectations and employment-related drivers. And what we really want to do is understand, how our talent pools across the world shifting and changing, what are the new talent trends, what companies or industries are becoming attractive, what are the decision-making factors of talent when they think about their future employers. And of course we use all this data to support the industry and authors and researchers and academics, support and help universities, and then of course employers in really understanding who their target audience is, what they think of them, what their competitive landscape looks like, and really be able to monitor and be more strategic about how they connect with this talent. So the data that I present to you today comes from the research that we've conducted around the world, but it will be a very specific cut of it, really focusing only on students from the top 200 universities in the world. So what we will uncover today is a little bit of an introduction. We all know how important the war for talent is nowadays, but just a few stats that I think are interesting. We will be understanding high achievers, so understand and define them first of all, and then really understand what they're looking for and what they think about employers, what they're looking for in their future career. We'll then look at what are the qualities of an attractive employer for them. So when they really think about the companies that they want to invest their future in, what should these companies offer? What are the attributes that they see these companies having? And then what are some of the communication touch points with employers? And what are some of the implications for employers who are interested in recruiting and attracting and retaining, of course, these high achievers? So of course we know it's all about the talent. We talk about this every day. It's not something that I need to overly highlight. I think we all agree on this. But it's all the more clear when we look at how the source of corporate value creation has changed just over the last 15, 20 years. If we look at 1982, which is pretty much when Universum started, when we asked corporations where their value was, as you can see here, over 60% thought that the value was in the tangible assets, and only 40% thought that it was in the intangible assets. If you fast forward that to 2010, which is already 6 years ago, you can see that things have quite changed. So 85% of companies now believe that their value really stands in the people, in the intangible assets, and the people that they employ, and only 15% still feels that it's in the tangible assets. And despite this, despite the fact that obviously there's a very thorough understanding about talent nowadays, 63% of CEOs are still very concerned about the availability of key skills. And what we find is that over 40% of them feel that they are unable or barely able to hire the talent that they need to meet their business needs. And of course, there's a lot of different factors influencing this or causing this. And it's very important to look at them by region and by market. But if we want to really kind of generalize and look at it from a global perspective, we see that it's becoming increasingly difficult to recruit talent. And the reason for that is that the skills that companies really need are not that easily found. So yes, there's still a lot of talent out there that has strong academic skills, but the quality of the candidates is still a challenge when it comes to all those other skills that companies really need, like humility or ability to integrate or cultural adaptation or leadership skills and so on and so forth, ability to think outside the box. As a result of that, we also see that there's double the recruitment activity, but only half of it is growth driven. So we see now with the millennial generation that there's a lot of job hopping. So talent typically wants to stay with a company for 2 to 3 years. And so of course we see companies really, go full force in recruitment mode, but they're not really, recruiting to grow the business. Mostly they're recruiting to actually fill the positions of people that are leaving. And this is even higher in emerging markets around the world. And then of course, if we think about the whole concept of localization, right, the diversity and complexity across markets calls for a highly localized approach. So companies that have one size fit all, whether it's, globally or even regionally or even within a market, are bound to fail because we see that target group segmentation, whether it's geographical or it's based on function or it's based on specific target group criteria, is extremely key right now. And then, of course, finally, information is power. We know that there's tons of information about you all over the place. So talent very often has made up their mind about who you are as an employer before they even have a chance to meet you. And on top of the fact that talent consumes data constantly, they also generate content. So any experience that they have with you, which is not pleasant, which is not positive, whether it's on the consumer side or whether it's in terms of their interaction with you as potential employees, of course that is blown over all over the internet, and then everybody has a chance to make up their mind about you based on these experiences, which is why it's even more important to make sure that when you develop a value proposition or think about recruiting talent, you don't focus exclusively on the external piece and bringing people in, but also creating that internal sense of pride that allows for people to have a consistent experience when they come in, right, in line with what they've heard about you when they weren't in the company, but then of course also create that sense of pride internally that allows for people to want to stay. Another challenge that companies are facing, of course, is that there's a huge mismatch. So if we look at the supply and demand for talent in 2021, as it is forecasted, we see that advances in technology, globalization, as well as shifts in labor demographics and changing customer needs will have the biggest impact on talent requirements for top firms. And what we do see is that there's actually a deficit in some markets with a huge surplus in others. So you can see, for example, that the strongest trend of talent surplus is in markets like India and Indonesia and Colombia and South Africa and Brazil. But if we look at certain other markets, of course, and there's a lot of demographics factors in this as well, markets like Taiwan or Japan or Italy or South Korea, the US, as well as the UK and most of Europe. These are all markets that are actually going to be experiencing a strongest trend of talent deficit. So companies that are recruiting in these markets need to start thinking about how they can actually use global recruitment to get some of the talent they need from these other markets that will have a talent trend surplus, and bringing them into the markets that will be experiencing a talent deficit. And then, of course, the talent pool is moving from industrial to emerging economies. So over the next decade, we see that the percentage of college-educated talent will actually rise to 60% in the E7. So that's about 217 million workers, as opposed to 143 million in the developed world. So when we look at the 7 countries, Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Russia, and Turkey, we see that that there's going to be a lot more college-educated talent coming from these markets than from the G7 countries: Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, and US. So in the past, companies that were hiring for top talent were looking predominantly at markets like the United States, for example, or Western Europe, and now it's obvious that they're going to need to shift their eyes towards the South or the East, towards emerging markets, because this is where most of the graduates are going to come from. But then again, this is also, these are also the markets where we see some of the biggest challenge in regards to the quality of candidates. So companies need to start thinking now how to attract these high achievers early on, or how to actually work with the education system to be able to ensure that talent is going to come out of university exhibiting many of the skills that companies are looking for today. And then, of course, the global takeover. Many of you here on the line have been millennial to death now. But, of course, we see now that with the entry of Gen Z into the workplace, I was just presenting on Gen Z yesterday during an event here in Singapore. I mean, they're really at our doorstep, and they're extremely bright. We had a panel of Gen Zers at this event of kids that are in 11th grade, and they seem to have it already almost figured out in terms of what they don't want. And we see that what they don't want is a typical corporate environment. And this generation soon is going to come into the workplace, and once they do, in the next 3 to 4 years, there will be up to 4 generations in the workplace. By 2025, we'll see that millennials and Gen Z will make up way more than 75% of the global workforce, with many baby boomers, retired or on their way to retiring. But as we look at certain industries like accounting or professional services, we see that 86% of the workforce already today is currently occupied by millennials. So it's really important to be able to understand this generation and understand, what are some of the commonalities across this generation around the world that can give us some clues as to what companies should think about when they recruit them. So we know that millennials are a 2.3 billion population worldwide. Their turnover rate is more than twice that of older workers. And of course, the important thing in being able to convey a strong value proposition that is consistent with the internal reality is that for an organization that has thousands of people, the cost of replacing millennials could actually be millions annually. And of course, I mean, millennials are not the core focus here, or just purely from a generational standpoint. But we know that they've created quite the cultural revolution in the workplace, with 50% feeling that they would rather have no job than a job they hate, and 80% of them feeling that work environment is way more important than the size of their paycheck, and 87% saying that the ability to learn and grow is essential to their job. So this constant need for professional training. 80% think that they deserve a lot more recognition than they get. So this creates a lot of generational conflicts in the workplace when baby boomer or Gen Xer managers do not really understand the level of commitment and feedback and encouragement that this generation needs, and that's actually one of the key reasons for attrition. 33% choose recognition over higher pay, and this number is actually going up every year. 75% are not completely satisfied with their job, because we know that 90% of them think that they deserve their dream job. And a dream job, of course, is by definition a dream. So it's really hard for them to find everything they need in one company, which is why they continue to move on. So being able to identify what kind of talent you need to bring on board and what's important to them, and making sure that you address as many of those things as possible, of course, it's definitely going to give you a competitive edge in your recruitment practices. And then, of course, we see that remuneration is a lot less important to talent today. So no matter how we look at it, no matter which country, we see that competitive base salary has been steadily declining globally over the last 6 years as a key attraction driver. So not only is it considered more of a hygiene factor, but it's literally something that students and young professionals would gladly have less of in exchange for some of the other things that are important to them. So what is it that's important to them? What is it that talent would never give up on, no matter how much money they're offered? Well, as you'll see here, it's primarily around the people. Inspiring management, inspiring leadership and mentorship, good environment with good mentors and bosses, open to developing employees, time for family, meritocracy, a positive working environment, integrity of the people, especially the management, respect for employees and concern over employees' welfare, and of course opportunities for development. So, at the end of the day, no matter how many tangible benefits a company goes out and communicates, it's really a lot about the environment that they that they provide and that they are able to convey, and what the fit is between the individual and the company. So again, as I always say, recruiting nowadays has become, very much less transactional, and it's become much more like dating. So you really want to put out as much as you can about yourself as an organization, and you want to give talent an opportunity to put themselves out there as much as possible, and you want to be able to bring on board those people that do fit your corporate culture, so that you can guarantee that they will be satisfied, and you have a stronger chance to be able to retain them. If we look at the evolution or the change of expectations in employers over the last few years, we see that talent that used to usually choose a company based on the industry that it belonged in. So for example, talent who was studying finance would normally pick the banking sector to start their career. Then it became a lot more about the brand, especially with the Gen Xers. So, I'm studying finance, and it's not just about the banks, it's about which specific brands within the banking sector, but also other companies, other brands are cool. Nike is cool, is a cool brand I could consider if they hire people like me. But then at the tail end of the Gen Xers, talent started to realize that it didn't really matter how prestigious the company was if they weren't really doing something that was impacting the organization. So if their role was a role that just, had only a marginal kind of value, or they didn't understand how it fit into everything else. And then the final or the latest step of that evolution, as I mentioned, is all about the environment. So more and more we see talent overall around the world thinking about their future employers on the basis of the type of environment that these employer will provide. So what does that mean? It means that, whilst a generation ago, we only had, 2 or 3 primary career profiles in the workplace, now we have a lot. When you were talking about Generation X, because work was something that you didn't necessarily have to like, you weren't expected to like your job, you weren't expected to like your boss, but it was something that you had to do because you had to, be able to support yourself. Of course, what mattered the most was the brand and the amount of money that you would make, and how prestigious the organization was, and how quickly you could become a leader. And as a result of that, when we assessed career profiles around the world, we saw that they were primarily comprised by careerists. So these are people that are very future-oriented, that ultimately want to be managers and leaders of groups of people, that have no problem working for a very corporate organization and really kind of climbing that ladder and following the rules to get to that point. You also had hunters. Hunters were people that were really eager to search for a new business, the kind of guys that were hired on commission only, that never put down the phone, and so on and so forth. And then you had leaders who were always historically a tough group to recruit. And these are people that, of course, are able to see the big picture in any situation, which helps them inspire their teams and themselves. These were people that preferred numerous benefits of working with us within a team environment. They didn't want to be lone wolves. Not afraid of being responsible for situations. See, responsibility is something to be desired, and so on and so forth. But of course, because millennials nowadays want work to be part of who they are, and not just a way to make a living, and they really want employers to embrace the complexity of their lives, there's many more career profiles that have emerged in the market. So now we have idealists. These are people who want to work in companies that value and respect their employees, that take ethical standards very seriously, that are strong on corporate social responsibility, that work in industries that can change the world or have an idea of how they can contribute to make the world a better place. You have entrepreneurs who are curious and creative individuals who are primarily focused on challenging and innovative work, who really want to be able to solve problems and think outside the box. And then, of course, you have your harmonizers. They're responsible, loyal, they want to think about what's good for the team, they want a well-balanced management philosophy, desire for harmony, great team players. And finally, we see internationalists, who usually tend to be the big picture individuals who focus primarily on the future instead of the day-to-day, and they're also very eager to have international connections and to have international experiences. So of course, the talent market nowadays is way more diversified compared to what it used to be, with of course many of these career profiles valuing a lot more than just money. However, when it comes to high achievers, and I will share with you in a second how we define high achievers for the purpose of that webinar, we actually see a very interesting hybrid situation where you have a lot of the attributes that are common to millennials, but you still see a lot of that openness to sacrifice and hard work that you used to see in the previous generation. So they're a very interesting group. And the reason why they are attractive to companies, it's not just because they are enrolled in the top universities worldwide, but because despite being millennials and hence coming with all the benefits of the millennial generation, the interest in, their ability to, technology, and so on and so forth, they actually still are very much eager to work for prestigious organizations, to work really hard, to follow the financial benefits, to follow that leadership opportunity, and are willing to put some of the other things that are critical to millennials a little bit more on the back burner, at least at the very beginning of their career. So this is the reason why this group is particularly interesting to companies, because again, it's getting harder and harder to find people that are just purely careerists or purely interested in, just following the rules of the company and playing along. So when it comes to high achievers, for the purpose of this presentation and this webinar, what we do, as I mentioned, is we gather insight about the career expectations of well more than 1.5 million career seekers from 57 countries. So the following insights will focus on business students and recent graduates from the Times Higher Education World University Rankings for 2015 and 2016. So specifically here, what we're looking is those 200 universities that the Times Higher Education World University Rankings have highlighted, and all the business students and recent graduates from those schools. And these universities come from these countries: the US, the UK, Singapore, Sweden, Canada, Germany, Hong Kong, Switzerland, China, and Norway. So quite a good mix of universities around the world. But actually, when we started kind of expanding this list to high achievers in other universities and other markets as well, we do see a lot of commonalities. So again, high achievers are important for you because they are millennials, so they do have everything that millennials want. However, they still exhibit some of the traits of the older generations. So what are those traits, and who is the high achiever as per our definition here? So meet Hugo. So Hugo is 26 years old. He has recently completed his master's in business law and economics at UK's University of Liverpool. He hopes to build a career as a strategic consultant for a multinational company. Hugo is an internationalist. He's a natural-born leader. He's strategic and adaptable. He's looking for a job that offers variety and diversity and opportunities to lead and inspire others. Hugo completed a semester in Germany, hopes to work in a role that sees him traveling overseas or at least interact with international clients and colleagues. His ambition is common to many high achievers. More than 50%, 52% in fact, we find have traveled overseas compared to, for example, only 43% of students at other universities, while more than 1/4 of them, actually 28% of high achievers, have actually studied abroad, compared to only 18% of other students. So Hugo is very conscious that in today's global economy, international experience is seen as an advantage by many employers, and really knows how to value this international experience that he can bring to the table, whether it's his personal travels, whether it's his international business or education opportunities, or whether it's that 3 months backpacking across Europe. And actually, Hugo is quite a good example of what high achiever looks like today, because when we actually look at the top 3 profiles of high achievers as we define them here, we don't see as many harmonizers or idealists or entrepreneurs, but we still see a lot of careerists. We still see a lot of hunters, which interestingly enough, hunters are almost extinct around the world. It's one of the hardest career profiles to find. And in fact, for those of you who are on the lookout to hire for sales job, sales opportunities, sales roles, and so on and so forth, you'll find it very difficult. But when it comes to high achievers, you can see there's still a pretty significant percentage of them who are hunters, so who are hungry, who are interested in following the opportunity, the money, and so on and so forth. And of course, the third career profile that has entered here, just like Hugo, is internationalists. So high achievers at these 200 universities globally are primarily careerists, followed by internationalists and hunters, which interestingly enough are some of the shrinking talent pools around the world. So what more can we learn about these high achievers? We saw it in Hugo. They tend to seek more international exposure, leadership, and professional experience. So when you look at what, when we ask these high achievers versus other students around the world, which of the following experiences do they have? You can see that, a high percentage of them, as we saw already, have traveled abroad. We can see that they have had a leading role in a student organization, about half of them. We can see that almost half of them have done internships and apprenticeships in the home country. And we can also see that a pretty significant number, almost a third of them, have actually studied abroad. So you can see that these are, definitely experiences that they have to a much larger extent than their other student peers around the world. One of the key trends that is still, very much part of this group of high achievers, because of course we know they are millennials and some things are not going to change, is the fact that high work-life balance is definitely the most important career goal for high achievers as well. So just because they're careerists, just because they're interested in the money, just because they're open to kind of sacrificing themselves to a certain extent in exchange for the prestige or the career and so on and so forth, they still do value work-life balance more than anything. That's still ultimately what they hope to achieve as the ultimate career goal, albeit to a very, slightly less percentage than the normal students. But what they actually value more than the rest of the population is becoming a leader or manager of people. So 42% of them actually really want to become leaders. And then also being competitively or intellectually challenged is a lot more important for high achievers than it is for the rest of the student population. On the other hand, for example, security and stability in my job is much more important, for example, to the remaining group, to the non-high achievers group, as defined in this report. Which is interesting because of course high achievers are more willing to work hard and work in a competitive environment, and they realize the challenges and the work that is required with that, and they're not scared of it, as opposed to the general student population, which really wants to feel secure and stable. They want to feel they're in an environment where they're not constantly threatened to lose their job and so on and so forth. So when we ask this group of individuals what it is that they define as attractive employers, when we ask them what it is that they're really looking for, as always we present them here with the Universum Drivers of Employer Attractiveness framework. So this is just the framework. It shows you the question that we asked. As you guys know, those of you who know Universum, you're very familiar with this. This is a framework that was developed for us by PhDs and academics, and it's supposed to represent all the different attributes of an employer or of as an organization as an employer. So you can see on the top left is reputation and image. This is basically the old concept of the brand. So things like prestige and market success and attractive, exciting products and services. But you do find some more millennial focused attributes in here, like inspiring leadership or inspiring purpose. But it's primarily about, the reputation and image of the company externally. Then you have remuneration and advancement opportunities. This is, fundamentally what's in it for them if they join you. So it has a lot to do with the career advancement and with the compensation and benefits. And then you have the job characteristics. So this would be the role, right? So what is the actual job going to be like? Is it going to be challenging? Is it going to be customer focused? And it also includes training and development opportunities. And then finally, you have people and culture. So this is really the social environment of the workplace. So things like respect for the people or friendly working environment and so on and so forth. What's interesting is that if we look at it around the world, reputation and image is the least important driver. So really companies, around the world who primarily, leverage their consumer brand are finding it really, really hard to remain competitive when it comes to the war for talent. And students, and professionals don't really look at the brand the same way that they used in the past, to the point that there's a lot of talent that is shifting now from big brands and multinationals to local organizations or government entities, nonprofit organizations, or even startups. But there are some things about the image that are important, and this is primarily around the inspiring leadership and the inspiring purpose. The remuneration advancement opportunities, when we look at it from a global perspective, are also losing in importance. They're becoming more and more hygiene factors. The role tends to be important only as, when it comes to the training and development that they will get, because they feel that if they can learn and be developed, they will, eventually fall into the role that is perfect for them. But normally, when we look at it around the world, when we look at more than 2 million responses around the world, it's pretty much all about, people and culture. So the type of environment, whether employees are respectful, whether they're friendly, whether they're committed to diversity and inclusion, whether the environment is dynamic. What's interesting, though, is that when we ask this group of high achievers what it is, if they could take these 40 attributes and describe their ideal company in 10 words, what would that company look like? You can see there's a lot of green in here. A lot that comes from the remuneration and advancement opportunity side. Normally, we wouldn't even see anything other than high future earnings in the top 10. But when it comes to high achievers, they value very much the opportunity for future earnings. They value very much leadership opportunities, definitely good reference for future career, and they really want clear path for advancement. What's interesting in here, which is in line with millennials worldwide, is that competitive base salary or benefits, financial benefits and so on and so forth are not in the top 10. So they don't really seem to be as interested in the amount of money they're going to make today, but they do want to know that if they work with you, they have the opportunity to make good money in the future. So if you keep looking at it, you can see that there's also 3 things that are extremely important to them from a people and culture perspective. One of them is the leaders who are supportive of their development. This is by far one of the most important things. They want an environment that is creative and dynamic. So it's no longer about these very corporate jobs where work is the same, where it's just, a 9-to-5 job and you're always working on the same things. And they want an environment that is friendly. And actually friendly working environment, when we look at all students and all, professionals market by market, has now become the most important attribute of the ideal company in almost every market. Still very important here. And then from a job characteristic perspective, you see that they're not so interested in the actual contents of the job, but they're more interested in getting the professional training and development and also in having a secure employment. And when it comes to the brand, you only find market success in here. So just knowing that it's a company that is successful is important, but not so much other aspects of the brand. Of course, this is if we look at all the 200 schools and all business students, but it's very important that you look specifically at your own target group, your own target schools. I'm sure you don't recruit everywhere, and you don't recruit everyone, and you don't recruit in every market and at every school. So it's really important to look at it by your target group specifically. But when we start breaking it down by country, you can already start to see some significant differences, even in just the top 3. So in Germany, for example, competitive base salary is still extremely important. In Norway, it's very much about corporate social responsibility. In Switzerland, it's very much about good reference for future career. In Singapore is, absolutely about a friendly work environment. So even high achievers in Singapore, they feel that a friendly working environment is by far the most important attribute of the ideal company. So again, looking at it by geographies and target segments and universities and so on and so forth is extremely critical. And then if we look at some differences in employer preferences, what we see is that high achievers rank prestige, variety of assignments, and recruitment of best talent much higher than the rest of the student population, while on the other hand, they place less importance on friendly and respectful work environment compared to other students. So one thing that's interesting here is that when we talk to students overall, we see that they actually almost see prestige as a negative thing, because they feel that a lot of pressure comes with working with a very prestigious organization. There's a lot of competition, there's a lot of expectations, there's a lot of responsibility, a lot of hard work, and very often they don't feel that, everything that they have to give is worth just having that brand name on their resume or on their business card. However, when you look at high achievers, you can see that they definitely do value prestige to a much higher extent, as you can see here, than other students. However, when it comes to, as you can see, respect for the people and friendly working environment, although this is extremely important for high achievers as well, remember they're still millennials, is more important to the rest of the student population. So students who perhaps don't necessarily fall under the careerist, hunter, or internationalist career profile, but perhaps, harmonizers, idealists, entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. When we look at the industries, we see that high achievers globally are drawn to industries where salaries are generally higher and work is potentially more prestigious, strategic, and challenging. So what we have seen that when we look at millennials across the world, management and strategy consulting, banks and financial services in particular have declined in attractiveness very significantly. And we see industries like government, for example, or media and advertising, or even hospitality, or startups, technology companies coming at the top. When it comes to high achievers, they still very much look to start their career within industries like management consulting, banks, and auditing. And this is very much in line with Gen Xers, the previous generation, and also very much in line with the careerist and hunter career profiles. The least attractive industries to this group is agriculture, shipping, arts, entertainment, and recreation. So if we look at who are the world's most attractive employers to high achievers versus non-high achievers, this gives you an idea of what are the multinational companies that this group of students finds the most attractive. One thing I just want to caution about when it comes to this is that what this ranking does not account for is the extremely strong competition that nowadays comes from local players and government. Because in order to be able to compile the world's most attractive employer rankings, companies need to be recruiting in more than just one market. And very often strong local players predominantly recruit in their home market, so they would not necessarily qualify to be in the world's most attractive employer rankings, but they are very, very strong competitors. So if we were to look at your the rankings of ideal employers among your target students at your target schools in your target countries, we would more than likely see that at least 50%, if not more, of the companies in the top 25 would be local players. So that's something that you need to account for. However, when we only look at multinational companies, you can see that there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to achievers, high achievers versus non-high achievers, with high achievers really, thinking highly of Bain & Company, companies like Deutsche Bank, Citi, and Accenture, while on the other hand, you can see that, the non-high achiever group as defined by this report is more interested in companies like Sony, for example, or Unilever, or IKEA, IBM, Nestle, and so on and so forth. So a little bit more diversified in terms of the companies that you see in here, with more representation of technology and FMCG companies. And then, of course, the other important thing to understand is how to communicate with this group. So we know that talent is exposed to tons of information every day. There are 758 million pictures that are shared on social media every day. Social media has almost 1.8 billion users worldwide. And if we go back 2 years ago, and things have definitely changed since then, there were 3 billion people that were online, and now it's many more. 20% of the world's internet traffic is from mobile devices, and we now buy more smartphones than dumb phones or old phones. There is 6 billion hours of video that are watched on YouTube every single month. 27 billion WhatsApp messages are sent every day. And when it comes to talent, we see that, for example, Facebook is no longer just a platform for youngsters, but it's really a platform that is, consistent, and it's a platform where most age groups are present. You can see here, 18 to 29-year-olds, there's about 90%, 78% of the 30 to 49-year-olds are on there, and 65% of the 50 to 65-year-olds are on Facebook, and 46% of the 65 plus years old, if we look at it globally, are actually on Facebook. So being able to use social media effectively to engage this talent is extremely important. A few years ago, you would have been great and super cool for simply having a Facebook account or careers page. Now that's no longer enough. There's so much noise on social media that understanding not only what channels you should be in, but the type of information that you should use on these social channels is extremely critical. So how many hours a day does talent spend on social media? It's a lot more than you think. Here you can see the average number of hours per day that are spent by social media users between the age of 16 and 64. Across all social media channels as of January of 2015. So if we look at certain markets like Argentina or the Philippines, this is where there's about 4 hours average of time a day are spent on social media. You can see that in markets like Japan or South Korea or China is a little bit less, but nonetheless, this is a very significant percentage of anybody's free time that you actually are on social media. And on top of that, 1 in 3 minutes spent on a mobile device is actually spent on a Facebook property. So either Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. So, campus recruiting, of course, is still important, but you must keep into account that campus recruiting is something that, was fundamental and necessary when the only place, in a time where the only place where you could really engage with talent was in person. So you would have to be present on these campuses in order to meet talent. But nowadays, you can reach them at any time of the day, no matter where they are in the world, through social media. And just like you can find them, they're really expecting to be able to find you. So what are the top channels that high achievers use to research potential employers? We see 9 channels are the average number of platforms that high achievers use to research employers. We see that employer websites are still very, very predominant. Career fairs are still popular, especially in some markets, while extremely unpopular in other markets. But you see that social media is very, very high, 60%. So these are the channels that students use to learn about potential employers. And the reason why they only use social media 60% of the times is because they can't find all the information that they need on social media, because a lot of companies are not making that information available there. But in terms of where they would prefer to learn about companies, social media is by far at the top. So what are the top online networks that are used by students or high achievers in 2016 to learn about companies? Facebook, 87.3% of students in this high achievers group in 2016 actually used Facebook. If we look at YouTube, 69%, Instagram, 55%, LinkedIn, not so much, 43%. So as you can see, talent spends twice the amount of time on Facebook as they do on LinkedIn, for example. And then you have, Google Plus and Skype and so on and so forth. And of course, you have markets like China where, there's no Facebook. So of course, you need to be able to use different channels there. If we look at the overview of student-employer interaction on social media, we look where it is that students search for information about employers. You can see that Facebook is very strong, especially in Asia Pacific, where 76% of students are currently going on Facebook to learn about companies. LinkedIn is still very much a social media channel that talent goes on to learn about employers, also because it's a channel that was, historically developed to highlight people and connect people based on their experience, while Facebook was more meant for social context. But because the environment is becoming predominantly more important to talent, being able to see the company on Facebook really gives the opportunity to have a feeling for what the company is inside, aside from the open vacancies that the company has. Instagram, as you can see, not as strong, although growing, particularly strong in Asia and the Middle East. And Twitter is, still a social media channel that students are using, although we're definitely seeing that it's not as effective and that it is on the decline. When it comes to channels where talent is following employers, you can see predominantly here on Facebook, when it comes specifically to Latin America, 85% of the students, still very strong on LinkedIn. Instagram is definitely growing, so talent now definitely joins and follows employers on Instagram, for those employers who are present on Instagram, and still on Twitter. And what that shows you is that even though they have very preferred channels or channels they prefer, they really do expect to see you across platforms, which is why, as I recently mentioned in one of my articles, it's very important that companies are across channels, but also that they have a unique strategy, but a consistent strategy across social media channels. And then when it comes to employers approaching students, they only feel that employers approach them to a much lesser extent on Facebook, for example, than they would hope. So even though, for example, 64% of them are following employers on Facebook, they feel that only 41% of them feel that employers are actually active there or are approaching students there. 69%, for example, for LinkedIn, if we look at Europe, and you can see Instagram very little. So employers seem to be more active on Instagram if you look at, the global average, for example, or if you look at Asia Pacific in general. And then finally, what are some of the implications for employers when it comes to, both these millennial trends that are seen across the board, but also, this particular group of high-performing individuals who obviously exhibit some hybrid attributes and characteristics. It's very important for you to support their desire for work-life balance. It doesn't matter, how much they're into a prestigious organization and how much of themselves they're willing to sacrifice to reach that leadership position. Millennials across all regions, even high achievers, really value work-life balance, even though we can see that they define it differently across different regions. However, the main definition is that they want to be able to have enough leisure time for their private life. So they really want to be able to not have to give up on their private life, on their family, and what they're passionate about in exchange for working for your company. And you can see that's quite consistent. They also think of it in terms of flexible working hours, but also very significantly and more in terms of the recognition and respect that they get from their employers. Another thing you need to think about is you need to provide a development roadmap. So we see that young professionals want significantly more time devoted to the development of their leadership skills and to coaching and mentoring. So when we look at professional training and development and clear path for advancement, these are among the top 10 most important attributes to high achievers. And when we ask talent the ideal versus current number of hours that are spent on specific tasks, you can see that talent would like to spend time discussing new ideas and new ways of working much more than they currently are. They would like to spend at least 4.65 hours a week discussing new ideas or new ways of working. They would like to spend 4.5 hours a week at least in the development of leadership skills. They would like to spend a lot less time on emails than they actually do, and they would like to receive a lot more coaching and mentoring than they actually do. So why is it important? It's really important that you build an employer brand that resonates. So you need to remember that you have an employer brand whether you actively work with it or not. All employers have an employer brand, so you may as well manage it. Out there is an idea about what kind of employer you are. And the more in tune you are with what people are saying about you, the more in tune you are with what your target group wants and what they feel about you and who you're competing with, the more likely you are to be able to really identify those attributes internally and highlight the core of your brand, which is the EVP, your employer value proposition, your soul as an organization, what you really stand for. And also, of course, keeping in mind that the brand always, the employer brand always has to be internal and external. It's not only about attracting talent, but it's about being able to retain them. And one of the biggest trends we've seen over the last year or two is that while before companies really focused on building the employer value proposition and communicating it externally, companies now are actually focusing on building their employer value proposition, communicating it internally, getting internal employees to participate and share stories, and then leverage that stories externally to attract talent, which works fantastically well because then the story is consistent and, companies don't have to sit down and, work or invent stories or things to communicate. They can just use real life examples and just engage talent with them. And then, of course, an effective strategy needs very solid foundations, which is why, research is absolutely fundamental. When we look at the strategic framework that companies use when it comes to building a true, distinct, attractive, sustainable, differentiating employer brand, we can see that the first step is really the leadership goals and aspiration, is really identifying your organizational objectives. How are your organizational purposes and objectives impacting your talent needs? And then really understanding, your talent and market insights. What are the key drivers of the people that you need to bring on board? How do you align what it is that's important for them with the perception of you, and what are your key talent competitors? Once you have all the information, looking at your internal perceptions, what are your current engagement drivers and key potential strengths and differentiators as an employer? What is it that your talent is saying, your current employees are saying about you as a company? And then, of course, once you have this information, developing, uncovering, unveiling, localizing, or refreshing your employer value proposition. These are really the unique selling points that provide the most, attractive, credible, true, distinct, and sustainable foundation for your employer brand. And once you have these unique selling points, how can you build a communication plan around them to make sure that you can actually communicate them in the best possible way? Where, when, how do you communicate these key messages? What platforms should you use? And then how you successfully activate your brand to engage both current employees and external talent. And finally, performance measuring. Looking at your KPIs, having very distinctive KPIs on every single activities so that you can measure whether your brand building activities are actually attracting the right talent and enhancing your brand perception. So all these things are extremely important. And in fact, if we look at companies that are very attractive to this generation, Google is by far the #1 ideal employer, but when we ask talent worldwide why they pick Google as an ideal employer, it's about the control over the number of working hours. It's about the creative and dynamic working environment, about the attractive, exciting products and services, about the corporate social responsibility and the environment that is fast-growing, entrepreneurial, friendly, the support for gender equality, the flexibility, the team-oriented work, the inspiring leadership, and the innovation. So nobody thinks of Google as being a best employer because they're the #1 search engine or because they sell ads. It's all about the type of environment, leadership, and experience that they provide. So of course, the other thing that we saw is that it's extremely important for high achievers to work for a company that has purpose. So you need to have a very clear purpose that connects your EVP themes. Companies that express their purpose and explain the reason why you should go and work there really have a lot stronger employer brands. They also have much stronger corporate brands. So we see that the most effective way to communicate the purpose and the employer value proposition is to humanize the brand, to make it genuine, to make it real, to use real employees to tell the stories. It's no more about those, strong kind of, carefully crafted messages that corporate communication has been using for a year to build a consumer brand. It's really about snackable content. It's about, small, genuine real-life stories that allow for people to really get a feeling for what it's like to live on the inside. They know that you're going to sell them on the company. They know that you're going to talk about how great it is to work for you because you need to attract them. So they really need to hear it from the people that work with you. And this is an example of how you craft a compelling story of your purpose. If you look here at EY and how they talked about their purpose, about their commitment to building a better working world, you can see that they, have focused a lot on it. They gave talent an opportunity to be part of that conversation, to connect with them, to build a better world together. They can, go on the webpage and they can see the stories, they can see the values and the global approach, and visit the editorial mix of videos and stories and thought leadership and questions and so on and so forth. So really it's positioning itself as an organization that definitely has a purpose and want to convey it, but also wants talent to become a part of that vision. Connect your story with your business strategy. I mean, if you look at Unilever, they're definitely a best-in-class company when it comes to engaging with students and conveying that sense of purpose. Unilever meets people's everyday needs while creating a brighter future. They talks about what makes a purpose-driven leader. They show, purpose-driven leaders working for the organization, and they share the experiences, and they convey the sense of really becoming and changing the world together, which is extremely attractive. You also should share your stories based on what is true, distinct, and attractive. So, no, but not everyone is Google. I mean, here you see an example of life at Google with, an office that's built for work and play with massage areas and play teams and people scootering around. Not everybody can offer this. But it's important that, you work towards an environment that is more, conducive to a more pleasant working experience. But it's also important that whatever you are doing currently to convey that, even though it's baby steps, is very clearly communicated externally. And then finally, I talked about humanizing your employer brand by empowering your employees to be your brand ambassadors. Work with your brand ambassadors a lot more. Engage your current employees. Identify people that embody specific EVP attributes and have them tell that story. Talk about, how people were youngsters were interns 12 months ago and where they are today, the inside story, interviews with senior and middle managers in various divisions, or the professional life, a full week inside the life, for example, of somebody working for your organization. Or I was you 12 months ago, how the company has helped me grow over the last year, or a casual look into the other half of your employees' lives, for example, and things like that. These are really things that help, that talent internally really loves to be engaged with. And this is exactly the type of stuff that talent externally wants to hear. So to go from good to great at attracting high achievers, always remember you must know your target talent persona. You must understand their goals, their attitudes towards their career. You must manage your employer brand. You must align your brand values to be true, to be distinctive and attractive. And you also must build a very strong social presence. So it's so important that you embrace storytelling to resonate with your target group in your communication. Every piece of content that you put out there, it should be data-led, it should be human, it should be purposeful. And of course, you should be present in the channels where they are most likely to be, and that's where you need to really share your brand values. The best employer brands understand the unique, distinct, and credible values of their company and build this into all of their talent communications. This is really what makes some companies so great. So, think about it. What is your organization doing to build its employer brand, and what is it doing to stand out of the crowd? So this is it for today. I hope this was informative and helpful, and hopefully it's going to give you some opportunities to think about how you're currently approaching talent externally and some of the things you should look into. And of course, this data is based on all students at 200 schools across only the countries that you've seen. But we have this data for your specific target group and your specific target market at your specific universities. And this is really the target group that you should be looking at when it comes to building your strategy and measuring the effectiveness of your current recruitment strategies. So always keep that in mind. Data, data, data. It's going to help you, not use the carpet bomb approach, but be much more like a sniper and know exactly what you're doing. So back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Rachele. Really good session. Thanks a lot. I'm really conscious of the time, and it's a couple of minutes to. So we've had a few questions come in, but predominantly they've been about the slides and some of the information here. So just to reassure everybody that in the next 24 to 48 hours, we will have uploaded everything, slides and also the recording, and we'll share that with you all. So that will be coming. If there are any further questions, if you want to contact Rachele or myself or anyone from your local market, there'll be some details on the email as well, so feel free to join us over email and carry on the discussion that way. But yeah, look, from Rachele, myself, and the team here, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again hopefully soon. Thank you.